The mahogany conference table reflected the afternoon sun streaming through the law firm's floor-to-ceiling windows. I sat at the far end, watching dust motes dance in the light while my family gathered around me like vultures circling carrion. The leather chair creaked as I shifted, trying to find a comfortable position for what I knew would be an uncomfortable hour. My name is Ethan Mitchell. I'm 34 years old, and I work as a financial analyst for a mid-sized investment firm in Chicago. It's the kind of job that sounds impressive at cocktail parties but leaves you feeling hollow at the end of each day, moving numbers from one column to another, making rich people richer while wondering what it all means. I'd taken the afternoon off for this, Grandpa Joe's will reading, though my father had made it clear he thought I was wasting my time. Joseph was broke, he'd said on the phone last week, his voice carrying that familiar edge of disdain. Always was, always will be. Even dead, he's still broke. But sure, take your precious PTO to hear how he left you his collection of bottle caps or whatever junk he hoarded in that disaster he called a house. Now, sitting in the law office of Hartley and Associates, I could feel my father's presence 3 chairs down like a storm cloud ready to burst. Richard Mitchell, never Dick or Rich, always Richard, sat with perfect posture in his tailored suit, his salt and pepper hair precisely styled despite the humid September weather. To his left sat my stepmother Patricia, her fingers adorned with enough jewelry to fund a small nonprofit. My half-siblings, Connor and Madison, flanked them like matching bookends, both scrolling through their phones with the practiced disinterest of people who'd never known real want. The lawyer, Mr. Hartley himself, was a thin man in his 60s with wire-rimmed glasses that caught the light whenever he moved his head. He cleared his throat, a small sound that seemed to echo in the sudden silence as phones were pocketed and conversations died. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice carrying the weight of countless similar meetings. "We're here for the reading of the last will and testament of Joseph Andrew Mitchell, dated August 15th of this year. 3 weeks ago, Grandpa Joe had updated his will just 3 weeks before the heart attack that took him in his sleep." I swallowed hard, remembering the last time I'd seen him. We'd sat on his porch, drinking sweet tea and watching the fireflies emerge in the gathering dusk. He'd seemed tired but not unwell, his eyes still carrying that spark of mischief that had made him my favorite person in the world since I was old enough to have favorites. "The estate, such as it is," Mr. Hartley continued, adjusting his glasses, "consists of the following. 1 property at 42 Elm Street, assessed value approximately $35,000 due to its current state of disrepair. Various personal effects within said property. 1 1994 Ford Ranger, non-operational, and liquid assets totaling $847.16 in a checking account at First National." My father scoffed, the sound sharp and dismissive. "I told you, broke as a joke, just like always." Mr. Hartley's eyes flicked to my father, then back to the document. "Mr. Mitchell left specific instructions for the distribution of his assets. To his son, Richard Mitchell, he leaves, and I quote, 'all the pride and ambition I never had, since he seems to value those above all else.'" The room went still. Connor actually looked up from his phone. My father's face flushed red, starting at his collar and working its way up like a thermometer. "That's it." Patricia's voice was shrill. "That's what he leaves his only son?" "There's more," Mr. Hartley said mildly. "To Connor Mitchell and Madison Mitchell, he leaves his collection of National Geographic magazines, in hopes they might learn something about the world beyond their screens." Madison rolled her eyes. Connor snorted. "Seriously? Old magazines?" To Patricia Mitchell, the lawyer continued, "he leaves his mother's tea set, with the hope that she might one day learn to slow down and actually taste what she's drinking." Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from smiling. Even in death, Grandpa Joe had a way of seeing right through people. And finally, Mr. Hartley said, his eyes finding mine, to his grandson Ethan Mitchell, he leaves the house at 42 Elm Street, all its contents, the Ford Ranger, and he paused, reaching into his briefcase. This. He pulled out a simple white envelope. My name was written across the front in Grandpa Joe's shaky handwriting. Inside, I could see the edge of what looked like money. One $10 bill, Mr. Hartley announced, with specific instructions that it be given to Ethan in this envelope, and that he, again I quote, know that some treasures aren't measured in dollars. The room exploded. My father's laughter was harsh and bitter, filling the space like smoke from a chemical fire. $10. He left you $10 and that dump of a house. Oh, this is rich. This is perfect. He turned to me, his eyes bright with cruel satisfaction. All those Saturdays you spent with him, all those holidays you chose him over family vacations, all that time wasted on a crazy old man who couldn't even hold down a steady job, and this is what you get. $10. Connor and Madison joined in the laughter, their voices creating a chorus of mockery that seemed to bounce off the conference room walls. Patricia dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, though I couldn't tell if she was laughing or crying. You know what this means? My father continued, standing now, his voice booming with authority. It means I was right all along. He was nothing. A nobody who lived in a falling-down house and died with nothing to show for it. And you... He pointed at me, his finger like an accusation. You wasted your time on a broke old fool. At least now you know where sentimentality gets you. A pile of junk and pocket change. I sat there, letting their laughter wash over me like a tide. The envelope felt light in my hands, almost weightless. Through the noise, I could hear Mr. Hartley trying to restore order, his voice lost in the chaos of my family's derision. But I wasn't really listening. I was remembering. I was 7 years old, sitting at the kitchen table in my father's house. The new house, the one he'd bought after the divorce. The one where everything was chrome and marble and cold to the touch. My stepmother Patricia had just finished explaining the new rules. Again. Your grandfather is not to come to this house uninvited, she'd said, her manicured nails tapping against the granite countertop. If he shows up, you are not to answer the door. Is that understood? I nodded, not understanding at all. Grandpa Joe had always been welcome at our old house, the one where Mom and Dad and I had lived before everything changed. He'd show up on Sunday mornings with donuts, or on random Tuesday afternoons with a new book he thought I'd like. But Mom was gone now, moved to Seattle for a job, Dad said, though I'd later learn it was more complicated than that. And apparently the rules had changed along with everything else. He's a bad influence, Patricia had continued, filling your head with nonsense, encouraging you to waste time with hobbies instead of focusing on your studies. Your father works very hard to provide opportunities for you. The least you can do is take advantage of them. The opportunities, it turned out, consisted mainly of tutoring sessions and structured activities designed to look good on a college application I wouldn't need to fill out for another decade. Piano lessons I hated. Mandarin classes where I spent more time watching the clock than learning characters. Soccer practice with a coach who yelled more than he taught. You could be exceptional, my father would say, reviewing my report cards with the intensity of a CEO examining quarterly reports. But exceptional requires sacrifice. It requires focus. It requires choosing the right influences. Grandpa Joe apparently was the wrong influence. But he was also the only person who seemed to see me, really see me, instead of some future version of myself that needed to be molded and shaped and optimized. When the scheduled activities became too much, when the pressure to be exceptional made it hard to breathe, I'd sneak out and ride my bike the 3 miles to Grandpa Joe's house on Elm Street. Even then, the house was showing its age. Paint peeling from the shutters, porch steps that creaked a warning with each footfall, a screen door that never quite closed right. But inside it was warm. It smelled like coffee and old books and the faint scent of pipe tobacco from years past. It felt like home in a way my father's house never did. "Ethan," Grandpa Joe would exclaim, as if my arrival was the best surprise he could imagine. Just in time. I was about to start a project, and I could use an assistant with steady hands. The projects varied. Sometimes we'd work on the old Ford Ranger, Grandpa teaching me the names of engine parts and the satisfaction of fixing something with your own hands. Sometimes we'd build birdhouses or repair furniture found at yard sales. Once, we spent an entire afternoon organizing his collection of coins, Grandpa telling me stories about where each one had come from, the history held in each small piece of metal. "Your father thinks I'm teaching you to waste time," he'd said once, holding up a wheat penny from 1943. "But I'm teaching you something more important. I'm teaching you to pay attention, to notice things, to find value where others see nothing." Those stolen afternoons were my sanctuary, but they came at a cost. "Where were you?" my father would demand when I'd return home. Grass stains on my jeans, dirt under my fingernails. "The park," I'd lie, getting better at it each time. "The Hendersons saw you riding toward Elm Street." Patricia would chime in, because Patricia always had informants. "Were you at that house again?" The punishments varied. Grounding, loss of computer privileges, extra tutoring sessions to make up for the lost learning time. But I kept going back. Couldn't help it. Grandpa Joe's house was the only place where I could just be Ethan, not Ethan who should be preparing for his future. By the time I turned 10, the Cold War between my father and grandfather had escalated. "He's poisoning you against me," my father accused one night after finding a model airplane Grandpa and I had built together. "Filling your head with working-class nonsense. Do you want to end up like him? Living in squalor? Dying with nothing?" "He's not living in squalor," I'd protested. "His house is just old. His house is falling apart because he never had the ambition to maintain it properly. Because he spent his life working dead-end jobs instead of building something meaningful. Is that what you want? To be a nobody?" The word hung in the air between us. Nobody. As if a person's worth could be measured solely by their bank account and the square footage of their house. As if all of Grandpa Joe's kindness, his patience, his ability to find joy in small things. As if none of that mattered because he drove an old truck and lived in a house with peeling paint. That night, I made a decision. I stopped sneaking around. Instead, I announced my visits. "I'm going to see Grandpa Joe," I'd say, standing in the foyer with my bike helmet already on. "No, you're not," my father would reply. "You have SAT prep." "I'm 10. I don't take the SATs for 6 years. Successful people prepare early. Then I guess I'll be unsuccessful." The fights were epic. Doors slammed, voices raised. Patricia would retreat to the bedroom with a migraine, real or imagined. Connor and Madison, still young enough to be exempt from the worst of the exceptional expectations, would watch from the stairs with wide eyes. But I kept going. Every Saturday, unless physically prevented, I'd make the ride to Elm Street. And Grandpa Joe would be there, waiting on the porch with 2 glasses of lemonade, as if he'd known I was coming all along. "Your father means well," he'd say sometimes, when I'd arrive angry and frustrated. "He just shows love differently than I do." "He doesn't show love at all," I'd argue. "He shows disappointment." Grandpa would be quiet for a moment, rocking in his chair, the chains creaking in a rhythm as old as the house itself. "Disappointment is just love wearing a disguise it doesn't know how to take off." I didn't understand what he meant then. I'm not sure I understand it now. But I understood that in Grandpa Joe's presence, I could breathe. I could be imperfect. I could fail at things and learn from the failure instead of being crushed by it. The war reached its crescendo when I was 15. Report cards had come out, and mine showed a B+ in advanced mathematics. Not a B, which would have been catastrophic, but a B+, which was merely unacceptable. "You're grounded," my father announced. "No visits to Elm Street until you bring this grade up." "It's already a good grade," I protested. "Good isn't exceptional. And in this family, we're exceptional." I looked at Connor, who'd made the honor roll again. At Madison, who'd just won a regional spelling bee. At Patricia, whose charity work was featured in the local society pages. At my father, whose business success allowed for this house, these opportunities, this life of carefully curated achievement. "Maybe I don't want to be exceptional," I said. "Maybe I just want to be happy." The silence that followed was deafening. My father's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, anger, before settling on something that looked almost like pity. "Happiness doesn't pay the bills," he said finally. "Happiness doesn't get you into good colleges or build a career or create a legacy. Happiness is what people settle for when they can't achieve greatness." "Is that what Grandpa did?" I asked. "Settled for happiness?" "Yes," my father said, the word coming out like a curse. "And look where it got him. That weekend I didn't go to Elm Street. Or the next. Or the next. Not because I was grounded, I'd stopped caring about punishments, but because I needed to think. I need to understand what I was choosing between. On one side was my father's path. Achievement, success, recognition. A life measured in accumulated accomplishments and material gains. On the other was Grandpa Joe's path. Simplicity, contentment, connection. A life measured in moments of joy and relationships that mattered. At 15, the choice seemed impossible. I wanted both. I wanted to matter in the world and be happy in it. I wanted success without sacrificing my soul. I wanted to make my father proud without becoming him. In the end, Grandpa Joe made the choice easier. He showed up at my school, waiting by the bike racks in his faded jeans and flannel shirt, looking out of place among the luxury SUVs and professional parents picking up their exceptional children. "Thought you might need a ride," he said simply. "Dad will be furious," I warned. "Probably," he agreed. "You coming anyway?" I got in the truck. We didn't go to Elm Street. Instead, he drove us out to the lake, to a spot where we'd gone fishing when I was younger. We sat on the tailgate, watching the sun paint the water gold and orange and red. "I'm not going to be around forever," he said eventually. "And when I'm gone, you're going to have to make your own choices about who you want to be. But I want you to know something." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a $10 bill. It was old, worn soft from handling. He held it up to the light, and I could see where someone had written something in tiny script along the edge. "This was the first $10 I ever earned," he said. "Got it helping Mr. Peterson repair his roof when I was about your age. My father wanted me to put it in the bank, save it for something practical. But you know what I did?" I shook my head. "I bought a book, The Count of Monte Cristo. Took me 3 months to read it, but it changed my life. Not because it made me rich or successful or exceptional, but because it made me realize that there are different kinds of treasure in this world. And the best ones, the ones that really matter, they don't always look valuable to everyone else." He handed me the bill. I could make out the writing now. First earned, best spent. Jam. "Your father thinks I'm a failure because I never accumulated much," Grandpa continued. "But Ethan, I've been rich in ways he'll never understand. Rich in time to watch sunsets. rich in stories to tell, rich in a grandson who sees me for who I am, not what I own. That's the kind of wealth that compounds interest in your heart. I held the $10 bill carefully, understanding even then that I was holding something precious. Keep it, he said. And when the world tries to tell you that your worth is measured in numbers, remember that some treasures don't fit in bank accounts. We sat there until the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars began to appear. Then he drove me home to face my father's wrath. It was worth it. Now, 19 years later, sitting in the lawyer's office while my family's laughter rang in my ears, I carefully opened the envelope. The $10 bill inside was different from the one Grandpa had given me by the lake. That one I still had, tucked safely in my wallet. This one was newer, crisper, with a serial number that started with an unusual sequence. JE82415. J. Joseph Ethan? August 24, 2015? I turned the bill over, looking for something, anything that might explain why this particular $10 was important enough to include in a will. Well, my father was saying, gathering his things with theatrical disgust. I suppose that's that. Congratulations, Ethan. You're now the proud owner of a condemned house and lunch money. I hope it was worth it. Richard, Mr. Hartley interjected. There is one more matter. Your father left a letter to be read only after the distribution of assets. May I? My father waved his hand dismissively, already halfway to the door. Whatever. Read it. I'm sure it's more sentimental garbage. Mr. Hartley cleared his throat and began. To my family, such as it is, by now you've received what I've left you, and I'm sure some of you are disappointed. Richard, you always were. Nothing I did was ever enough. No achievement ever grand enough to earn more than a grudging nod. I failed you as a father not because I didn't provide, but because I couldn't teach you that provision isn't just about money. Patricia Connor Madison, you barely knew me by design. I was kept at arm's length, deemed a bad influence, too poor to be worth your time. I don't blame you. You were following the example set for you. But Ethan, my boy, you saw me. You chose me even when it cost you. So to you, I leave the only real treasures I have. My home, which sheltered joy even as it crumbled. My truck, which carried us on adventures worth more than any luxury car. And a reminder that value isn't always visible to those who refuse to look closely. The $10 isn't just money. It's a key. Start with the serial number. Trust yourself. And remember, I've been saving for you all along, just not in the way your father would understand. All my love, Grandpa Joe. The silence that followed was different from before. Heavier. Fuller. A key, Patricia said, her voice uncertain. What does that mean? It means he was senile, my father snapped, but something in his voice had changed. The absolute certainty was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like doubt. Come on, we're leaving. They filed out, my father pausing at the door to look back at me. For a moment, I thought he might say something else. Then the moment passed, and he was gone, taking his exceptional family with him. Mr. Hartley waited until the door clicked shut before speaking again. There's one more thing, he said quietly. Your grandfather left specific instructions that this be given to you only after the others had gone. He handed me another envelope, this one thicker, heavier. Inside was a brass key and a business card for First National Bank. On the back, in Grandpa's handwriting, Safe Deposit Box 82415. Some treasures are worth hiding until the right person comes along. My hands shook as I connected the dots. The serial number on the bill, JE82415. The safe deposit box, 82415. He'd been planning this, laying out breadcrumbs for me to follow. Did he say anything about what's in the box? I asked. Mr. Hartley smiled, the first genuine expression I'd seen from him. Only that he'd been preparing for your future in his own way. He was quite specific about the timing of all this. Said you'd understand why when you were ready. I thought about all those Saturdays at Elm Street, all those projects we'd worked on together, the coins we'd cataloged, the furniture we'd restored, the lessons about finding value where others saw nothing. Thank you, I said, standing and shaking his hand, for everything. Your grandfather was a special man, Mr. Hartley said. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. I left the law office with the key burning a hole in my pocket. The bank was only 6 blocks away, but I walked slowly, needing time to process what had just happened. My phone buzzed repeatedly, messages from Connor and Madison, probably gloating. I ignored them. First National Bank was an old institution, the kind with marble floors and high ceilings that made your footsteps echo. The woman who helped me was young, professional, and mercifully uninterested in small talk. She led me to the vault, checked my identification against her records, and left me alone with box 82415. It was larger than I'd expected, one of the bigger sizes they offered. My hands trembled as I inserted the key and heard the satisfying click of tumblers falling into place. Inside the box, I found several things. First, a leather journal, worn and well-used. I recognized it immediately, Grandpa Joe's coin collection log, where he'd carefully documented every piece he'd acquired over the years. But as I flipped through it, I realized it was more than just a record. It was a roadmap. Each entry included not just the coin's details but notes about its actual value versus its perceived worth. Pennies worth thousands. Dollars worth hundreds. A lifetime of carefully curated treasures that looked like pocket change to the untrained eye. Second, a manila envelope containing deeds and titles. Not just for the house on Elm Street, but for 3 other properties I'd never known he owned. Small houses, all of them, in neighborhoods that had been forgotten when he'd bought them but were now experiencing revival. The papers showed he'd purchased them for almost nothing decades ago. Current market estimates were penciled in the margins, numbers that made my analyst brain spin. Third, bank statements. Not for the checking account Mr. Hartley had mentioned, but for investment accounts I'd had no idea existed. Modest deposits made regularly over 40 years, compound interest working its quiet magic. The total was substantial. Not wealth by my father's standards, perhaps, but more than enough to live comfortably for a lifetime if managed wisely. And finally, at the bottom of the box, wrapped in tissue paper like something precious, a photograph. It showed Grandpa Joe and me when I was about 8, both of us covered in motor oil and grinning at the camera. We'd just finished our first successful repair on the Ford Ranger. I remembered that day, how proud I'd felt, how accomplished, not because we'd fixed something valuable, but because we'd fixed something together. Behind the photo was a note. Ethan, by the time you read this, you'll understand what I've been trying to teach you all these years. Value isn't about what something looks like on the surface. It's about knowing how to see what others miss. The house needs work, yes, but check the basement carefully. The truck runs fine with the right part. Check behind the spare tire. And remember, your father judges worth by accumulation. I judge it by appreciation. You, my boy, have always known the difference. That's why this is all yours. Use it wisely. Share it generously. And never, ever let anyone convince you that love is measured in dollars. Grandpa Joe. I sat there in the quiet of the bank vault, surrounded by proof that the man my father had dismissed as a failure had been playing a longer, smarter game than any of us had imagined. But more than that, I was surrounded by evidence of love. Every careful investment, every hidden treasure, every patient year of accumulation, It had all been for me. The grandson who'd chosen him when everyone else had written him off. My phone rang. My father. "Did you go to the bank?" His voice was different now. Uncertain. Mr. Hartley must have told him about the key. "Yes," I said simply. And I could have told him. Could have listed the properties, the accounts, the valuable coins disguised as a hobbyist's collection. Could have given him numbers that would have made him reconsider every dismissive word he'd ever said about Grandpa Joe. But I didn't. "I found what he left me," I said instead. Which was everything that mattered. The silence stretched between us, filled with years of misunderstanding and missed opportunities. "Ethan," he started, then stopped. Did he leave you anything else?" I finished. "No, Dad. He left you exactly what he thought you deserved." I heard him exhale sharply. "I see. Do you?" I asked, surprising myself with the question. "Do you really see?" Because Grandpa Joe saw everything. He saw how you measured worth and decided to show you what it felt like to be found wanting. He saw how you kept him from your other children and decided they didn't deserve to benefit from what they'd been taught to despise. He saw. "Enough," my father interrupted, but the word lacked its usual force. "I don't need a lecture from you." "No," I agreed. "You needed one from him. But you never listened." Another silence. Then, "The house is probably full of problems. You'll need contractors, permits, God knows what else." "I know some people." "I'm good, Dad. Thanks." "You can't be serious about keeping it. That neighborhood, that house, was where I learned everything important," I said. "Where I learned to fix things instead of throwing them away. Where I learned that time is more valuable than money. Where I learned that being exceptional isn't about being better than everyone else. It's about being the best version of yourself." "Ethan." "I have to go, Dad. I have a house to look at." I hung up before he could respond. There would be time for more conversation later, or there wouldn't. Right now, I had a treasure hunt to complete. The drive to Elm Street took 15 minutes but felt like traveling through time. Each familiar landmark, the park where Grandpa had taught me to ride a bike, the ice cream shop where we'd celebrated my small victories, the library where we'd spent rainy afternoons, brought back a flood of memories. The house looked exactly as I remembered it, maybe a little more worn, a little more tired. The key was under the third flower pot from the left, just where it always had been. Some things Grandpa knew shouldn't change. Inside, the smell hit me first. Coffee and old books and that indefinable scent of home. Everything was as he'd left it, down to the half-finished crossword puzzle on the kitchen table and the reading glasses folded on top of yesterday's newspaper. But I was looking for something specific now. The basement door creaked as I opened it, the wooden steps groaning under my weight. Grandpa's workshop was down here, tools hanging in precise order, projects in various stages of completion lining the shelves. "Check the basement carefully," his note had said. I looked around, trying to see with the eyes he'd taught me to use. There, in the corner behind the water heater, a section of wall that looked slightly different, the mortar between the bricks a shade lighter than the rest. I ran my fingers along the edge and felt the subtle give of a hidden panel. It took me 20 minutes to figure out the mechanism, but eventually the panel swung open, revealing a space about the size of a closet. Inside were metal shelves, and on those shelves, coins. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, each in protective sleeves, each labeled with Grandpa's careful handwriting. But these weren't the ones from his public collection, the one everyone knew about. These were the real treasures, the ones he'd kept hidden. I pulled out one at random, a 1933 double eagle that shouldn't have existed, that should have been melted down by government order. Another, a 1913 Liberty Head nickel, one of only 5 known to exist. Each coin I examined was rarer, more valuable than the last. But it was the notebook on the top shelf that made me sink to my knees on the cold basement floor. For Ethan, the cover read, "The Real Collection." Inside, in Grandpa's increasingly shaky handwriting, was the true story. How he'd started collecting not for himself but for me, from the day I was born. How he'd used his knowledge and patience to acquire pieces that others overlooked or undervalued. How he'd hidden them not from thieves but from my father, who would have seen only their monetary worth and missed their real value, the decades of love and hope they represented. The final entry was dated just a month ago, nearly complete now. Estimated value at current market, $12 to $15 million. But the real value, giving my grandson the freedom to choose his own path. Ethan, you once told me you wanted to be happy more than exceptional. With this, you can be both, or neither. The choice, finally, is yours. I sat in that basement, surrounded by millions of dollars in rare coins, and cried. Not for the wealth, though I understood its significance. Not for the vindication, though some petty part of me enjoyed imagining my father's face when he learned the truth. I cried for the man who'd spent 34 years carefully building a future for a grandson who'd simply loved him. My phone buzzed. "Connor, Dad's freaking out. What did you find?" Then Madison. "Was there really money? How much?" Then Patricia. "Your father would like to discuss the estate. Perhaps we were hasty." I ignored them all. Instead, I climbed back upstairs and went to the kitchen, where Grandpa's coffee maker still held this morning's brew. I poured myself a cup, black like he drank it, and sat at the worn Formica table where we'd shared so many conversations. The Ford Ranger's keys hung on the pegboard by the back door. "Check behind the spare tire," his note had said. I smiled, already knowing what I'd find. Grandpa had taught me about hiding in plain sight, about keeping your best treasures where only those who truly looked would find them. Sure enough, tucked behind the spare was a small metal box. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were the titles to the other properties and a note. "The truck runs better than it looks, just like its owner did. Take care of her, and she'll take you anywhere you need to go." I spent the rest of the day going through the house, not cataloging assets but reliving memories. Every room held stories. Every object had meaning beyond its monetary worth. The Afghan on the couch that Grandma had crocheted before I was born. The bookshelf built from reclaimed barn wood, each shelf slightly crooked but somehow perfect. The coffee cans full of screws and bolts and washers, sorted by size and type, because you never know when you might need exactly the right piece. As the sun began to set, painting the walls the same gold and orange I remembered from childhood, I made my decision. Or rather, I realized the decision had been made long ago, on a tailgate by a lake, when an old man handed a young boy a $10 bill and taught him about different kinds of treasure. I called Mr. Hartley first. "I want to set up a foundation," I said, "for kids who need what Grandpa gave me. A place to just be themselves. A place to learn that their worth isn't measured in their achievements." "That's a beautiful idea," he said. "Your grandfather would be proud." "He already was," I said. "That's what made all the difference." Next, I called my boss and quit. The conversation was shorter than I'd expected. Turns out, when you no longer need the job, you stop needing to justify leaving it. Finally, as darkness settled over Elm Street and the fireflies began their ancient dance, I called my father. "I'm keeping the house," I said without preamble. "Ethan, be reasonable. Even if there was some money hidden away, that place is falling apart. You'll spend everything just making it livable." "It's already livable," I said. "I lived here, really lived. Not existed, not prepared for life, not built my resume. I lived." "You can't live in the past," he argued. I'm not. I'm living in the present Grandpa made possible. Dad, he left me enough. More than enough. Enough to restore this house. Enough to help kids who feel like they're drowning in expectations. Enough to prove that there's more than one way to be exceptional. How much is enough? The question came out strangled, as if he was fighting against asking it. I thought about telling him. The number would change everything, how he saw Grandpa, how he saw me, how he saw himself. But then I remembered Grandpa's words. Some treasures aren't measured in dollars. Enough to be happy, I said. Enough to be generous. Enough to know that I was loved by someone who saw my value even when I couldn't see it myself. The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. Then, I was trying to protect you. From disappointment. From struggle. From ending up like Grandpa. I finished. Dad, I can only hope to end up half the man he was. He died with a house full of love, a legacy of kindness, and yes, millions of dollars that he hid because he knew you'd only see the money and miss the message. Millions. The word was barely a whisper. Does it matter? I asked. Does knowing he was secretly wealthy change how you feel about the way you treated him? Does it make his love worth more? Does it make mine worth having? Another long silence. Then, so quietly I almost missed it. I don't know how to value things I can't count. It was the most honest thing my father had ever said to me. I know, I said gently. Grandpa knew too. That's why he gave you what he did, not to hurt you, but to make you think. Dad, you have 3 children who've spent their lives trying to earn your approval by being exceptional. But we never learned how to be happy. That's the inheritance Grandpa left you, the chance to change that. It's too late, he said. It's not, I insisted. Connor's only 25. Madison's 23. And I'm still your son, even if I choose a different path. It's not too late to learn what Grandpa tried to teach us. Which was? I looked around the kitchen at the crossword puzzle and the reading glasses and the coffee cup with the chip on the handle that Grandpa had refused to throw away because it still held coffee just fine. That love isn't earned by being exceptional. It's given by being present. That success isn't about what you accumulate, but about what you appreciate. That the best investment you can make is in the people who choose to spend their irreplaceable time with you. I heard my father breathing on the other end of the line, processing ideas that went against everything he'd built his life around. The $10, he said finally. It really was a key? The serial number led to a safe deposit box. But Dad, the money was never the real treasure. The real treasure was that he spent 40 years thinking about my future, planning for it, protecting it. He could have lived easier, could have spent it on himself. Instead, he lived simply so that one day I could live freely. That's love. That's what you measure it in, not dollars, but decades of quiet sacrifice. I need to think, my father said. Take your time, I told him. The door's open when you're ready. And Dad? He loved you too. He just knew you wouldn't believe it unless it came with a lesson. We hung up without saying goodbye, but somehow it felt more like a beginning than an ending. I slept that night in my old room, the one Grandpa had kept exactly as I'd left it. Baseball trophies I'd won before quitting to focus on academics. Model airplanes we'd built together. Books he'd bought me at yard sales. Their pages yellow but their stories still vibrant. In the morning I'd start making plans. The house would need work, yes, but it would be work done with love, the same way Grandpa had maintained it all those years. The foundation would take time to establish, but I had nothing but time now. The coins would need to be properly evaluated and sold, but each one would be handled with the respect it deserved. But tonight, I just lay there in the small bed, listening to the house settle around me, feeling wealthier than I'd ever imagined possible. My phone buzzed one last time. A text from Madison? Is it true? Was Grandpa really rich? I thought for a moment before responding, yes, richer than any of us knew, just not in the way Dad taught us to measure it. Then I turned off my phone and closed my eyes, falling asleep to the sound of crickets and the distant hum of the city, safe in the knowledge that I was home. The next few weeks passed in a blur of discoveries and decisions. Every day brought new surprises as I went through the house more thoroughly. The coin collection in the basement was just the beginning. I found first edition books hidden in the attic, their pages uncut, their value astronomical. I discovered that the junk furniture Grandpa had restored was actually vintage pieces worth thousands each. Even the old photographs tucked in shoeboxes turned out to include rare historical images that museums wanted to acquire. But it was the letters I found that stopped me cold. Hidden in a false bottom drawer in his bedroom, tied with twine and yellow with age, were dozens of letters between Grandpa Joe and my grandmother, who died before I was born. But these weren't love letters exactly. They were business correspondence. My grandmother, it turned out, had been a shrewd investor with a gift for seeing potential where others saw problems. She'd been the one who'd started the coin collection, who'd identified the properties to buy, who'd mapped out a long-term strategy for building wealth slowly and quietly. Joseph, one letter read, "The boy Richard is too much like his grandfather, my father, who measured everything in dollars and died bitter. Promise me that if we have grandchildren, we'll teach them differently. Promise me we'll show them that wealth is a tool, not a goal. That it's meant to create freedom, not forge chains." And he had promised. And he had kept that promise even after she was gone. I was reading these letters for the third time when someone knocked on the door. Not the doorbell. A knock, hesitant and uncertain. Connor stood on the porch, looking uncomfortable in his designer jeans and Princeton sweatshirt. We hadn't spoken since the will reading. "Hi," he said. "Hi," I replied. Can I come in?" I stepped aside, and he entered, looking around with the expression of someone visiting a foreign country. "I've never been here before," he admitted. "Dad always said." He trailed off. I know what Dad said. We stood in the living room, two brothers who'd grown up in the same family but different worlds. "Was it all true?" Connor asked finally. "What you told Madison? About Grandpa being rich?" "Define rich," I said. He looked frustrated. "You know what I mean. The money. Dad's been going crazy, hiring lawyers, trying to contest the will. He says Grandpa must have been senile, hiding assets, that you manipulated." "Stop," I said quietly. "Just stop. Is that why you're here? To spy for Dad?" Connor's shoulders slumped. "No. Maybe. I don't know. I'm here because—" He paused, looking around the room again. "Because I realized I don't know anything about my own grandfather except that he was poor and Dad was ashamed of him. And now it turns out maybe he wasn't poor, and I still don't know anything about him, and he's dead, and it's too late." I studied my half-brother, really looked at him for the first time in years. Behind the prep school polish and carefully styled hair, I saw something I recognized. A young man who'd been molded into an image of success that didn't quite fit. "It's not too late," I said. "Come on. Let me show you something." I led him to the workshop in the basement, not to the hidden room with the coins, but to the main area where Grandpa's tools still hung in perfect order. "This is where he taught me to fix things," I said. "Not just objects. Myself too. When Dad's pressure got too much, when I felt like I was drowning in expectations, I'd come here. Grandpa would hand me sandpaper and a piece of wood, and we'd work in silence until I could breathe again." Connor ran his hand over the workbench, worn smooth by decades of use. "What was he like?" So I told him. Not about the money or the properties or the valuable collections. I told him about the man who'd make up silly songs while we worked, who'd let me eat ice cream for breakfast on my birthday, who'd stood in the rain for 2 hours to watch me play Little League even after Dad had forbidden him from coming to the games. He sounds. Connor paused, searching for words. Kind. He was the kindest person I've ever known. Dad's not kind, Connor said suddenly, the words seeming to surprise him. He's successful. He's driven. He's exceptional. But he's not kind. No, I agreed. He's not. We were quiet for a moment, the truth hanging between us like a cobweb, fragile, but suddenly visible. Can I ask you something? Connor said. If Grandpa hadn't left you money, if it really had just been this old house and $10, would you still have kept it? Would you still be here? I didn't have to think about the answer. Yes. Why? Because the money was never the point. The point was that someone saw me for who I was and loved me anyway. The point was learning that there are different ways to be valuable. The point was, I gestured around the workshop at the tools and projects and lifetime of careful work. All of this, the life he built, not the wealth he accumulated. Connor was quiet for a long time. Then, I'm majoring in finance because Dad expects it. But I hate it. I want to be a teacher. The confession hung in the air like a challenge. So be a teacher, I said. Dad would. Dad would be disappointed. So what? He's disappointed anyway. At least be disappointed doing something that matters to you. Easy for you to say. You inherited millions. I laughed, surprising both of us. Connor, the millions aren't why I can say it. I can say it because Grandpa Joe taught me that disappointing people who only value you for your achievements isn't a loss. It's freedom. Connor looked around the workshop again, seeing it differently now. Could you teach me what he taught you? Not about the money, he added quickly. About the rest of it. About being okay with not being exceptional. You are exceptional, I said. Just not in the way Dad measures it. And yes, I can teach you. Want to start with something simple? He nodded, and I handed him a piece of sandpaper and a rough board, just like Grandpa had done for me so many years ago. We worked in companionable silence, the rasp of sand on wood filling the space where words weren't needed. That's how Madison found us an hour later, having let herself in with the key I'd given her. Mom's going to kill you both, she announced. Connor, you were supposed to be at dinner. And Ethan, Dad's literally hired a private investigator to find out about Grandpa's assets. Let him, I said. He won't find anything Grandpa didn't want found. Madison perched on a stool watching us work. Unlike Connor, she'd always been more observant, less willing to accept the family party line without question. You know what's funny? She said. I actually remember Grandpa a little. Not much. I was only 5 when Dad cut him off completely. But I remember he gave me a silver dollar for my birthday once. Dad took it away, said it would just get lost, that I was too young to appreciate it. Do you still want it? I asked. She looked surprised. What? I led them both upstairs to Grandpa's study, where his public coin collection was displayed. I found the album from Madison's birth year and flipped through until I found what I was looking for. A series of silver dollars, each one dated from a different year of our lives. He saved one for each of us, every year, I explained. Even after Dad stopped letting him see you. Even when he didn't know if he'd ever get the chance to give them to you. Madison's eyes filled with tears as she touched the protective plastic over the coins. 23 silver dollars, one for each year of her life, waiting patiently for a reunion that never came. He remembered me? He remembered all of us. He just wasn't allowed to show it. Connor was flipping through his own album, 25 years of small treasures collected by a grandfather he'd been taught to dismiss. We should go, Madison said finally, but she didn't move. You could stay, I offered. Have dinner. Look through more of his things. Learn about who he really was. They exchanged glances, a lifetime of conditioning warring with curiosity. Dad would, Connor started. Dad is hiring private investigators to dig up dirt on a dead man who loved him, I interrupted. Maybe it's time to stop worrying about what Dad would do and start thinking about what you want to do. In the end, they stayed. We ordered pizza, Grandpa's favorite, pepperoni with extra cheese, and ate it on the living room floor, going through photo albums and laughing at pictures of Grandpa through the decades. He'd been handsome in his youth, with the same mischievous eyes that had twinkled at me from his weathered face. Look, Madison said, pointing to a photo. Is that Dad? It was. My father at maybe 10 years old, grinning widely as he held up a fish. Grandpa Joe beside him with a matching grin. They looked happy. They looked like father and son who loved each other. What happened? Connor asked quietly. I'd wondered the same thing for years. I think Dad decided that love had to be earned. And once you believe that, you spend your whole life trying to earn it instead of just accepting it. And you make everyone around you do the same. That's really sad, Madison said. Yes, I agreed. It is. We spent the rest of the evening sharing stories. Mine about Grandpa. Theirs about growing up in the shadow of relentless expectations. By the time they left, something had shifted. We weren't quite a family yet, but we were no longer strangers. Can we come back? Connor asked at the door. Anytime, I said. Grandpa's door was always open. I intend to keep it that way. After they left, I sat in Grandpa's chair, thinking about families and legacies and the different ways we inherit from those who came before us. My father had inherited his father's appearance, his intelligence, his capacity for hard work. But somewhere along the way, he'd rejected the most important inheritance, the ability to find joy in simple things, to value people over achievements, to measure wealth in ways that couldn't be deposited in a bank. Now that inheritance had skipped a generation, landing with me, and I was determined not to waste it. The private investigator showed up 3 days later. He was a pleasant enough man, professional and polite, who explained that he'd been hired to assess the estate's value for interested parties. My father, you mean? I said. He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I can't discuss my clients, but I do need to ask about any assets that might not have been disclosed during the will reading. Everything was disclosed, I said truthfully. Everything that Grandpa had wanted disclosed. Anyway, I see. And the rumors about hidden collections? Valuable properties. My grandfather collected coins, I said. He owned some rental properties. It was all in the will. The investigator made notes. And you haven't discovered anything since? Hidden rooms, safety deposit boxes, that sort of thing. I thought about the false wall in the basement, the properties in up-and-coming neighborhoods, the millions in rare coins waiting to be quietly liquidated. I've discovered that my grandfather was exactly who he appeared to be, I said. A simple man who lived below his means and found joy in small things. If my father is hoping to find evidence of secret wealth, he's going to be disappointed. The investigator studied me for a moment, then closed his notebook. You know, I've been doing this for 20 years. I've seen families tear each other apart over money, but I've rarely seen someone so at peace with an inheritance, whatever its size. That's because the inheritance isn't the money, I said. It's the lessons, and those can't be contested in court. He left, and I knew he'd report back to my father that there was nothing to find, because that's what Grandpa would have wanted, for the real treasures to remain hidden until they could be used for their intended purpose. Over the next months, I quietly began liquidating the coins, working with discreet dealers who understood the value of privacy. The first sales funded the restoration of the house, not to flip it, but to honor it. I hired craftsmen who understood that some things were worth preserving, who could see the beauty in worn wood and aged brick. The foundation came next. The Joseph Mitchell Center for Youth Development, dedicated to giving kids a place to just be kids, to explore interests without the pressure of building resumes, to learn that their worth wasn't tied to their achievements. Connor joined the board, bringing a teacher's perspective to our planning. Madison helped with the design, creating spaces that felt like home rather than institutions. My father watched from a distance, his anger gradually giving way to something else, bewilderment, maybe, or the first stirrings of recognition that there might be more than one way to measure success. He finally came to see me on a cold February morning, almost 6 months after the will reading. I was in the workshop, refinishing a table I'd bought at an estate sale, when I heard his footsteps on the stairs. "You're getting good at that," he said, watching me work. "I had a good teacher." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "The investigator said there was nothing to find." "He was wrong," I said. "There was everything to find. Just not what you were looking for." "Ethan, Dad, Grandpa left me $12.7 million. The words hung in the air like sawdust. My father's face went through several expressions before settling on shock. "What?" "Coins, mostly. Some properties. Investments he'd been making since before I was born. 12.7 million, give or take market fluctuations. But the investigator found what I wanted him to find, what Grandpa wanted him to find, because the money was never meant to be fought over. It was meant to be used, and not for me to live in luxury. For this." I gestured around the workshop, but I meant more than that. I meant the foundation, the restored house that would welcome kids who needed refuge, the chance to pass on what Grandpa had taught me. My father sat heavily on a stool. 12 million. Does knowing that change how you feel about him? I asked. Does it make him worthy of respect now? Or does it just make you angry that he didn't share it? I don't know, he admitted. I don't know what to feel. Feel proud, I suggested. Your father built something from nothing. He played a long game that none of us saw coming. He protected what he built from people who would have seen only its monetary value. And he passed it on to someone who understood that money is just a tool, not a treasure. I would have. You would have told him to invest it differently, to maximize returns, to leverage it into more. And you would have missed the point entirely, which is that he already had everything he wanted. A home, work he enjoyed, a grandson who loved him. The money was just insurance set aside for the future. For me, my father was quiet for a long time. Then, I was ashamed of him. I know. He knew too. Yes. And he forgave me? I thought about Grandpa's letter, about his hope that disappointment was just love wearing a disguise it didn't know how to take off. He loved you, I said. He never stopped loving you. He just stopped trying to earn your approval, because he finally understood that your approval came with a price tag he wasn't willing to pay. Which was being someone else. My father looked around the workshop, seeing it clearly for perhaps the first time. The careful organization, the quality tools bought one at a time over decades, the projects in various stages, each one a lesson in patience and craftsmanship. I don't know how to be different, he said finally. You don't have to be different. You just have to be willing to see that different isn't wrong. Connor wants to teach. Let him. Madison wants to travel, to write, to find her own path. Let her. Stop measuring your children's worth by their achievements and start measuring it by their happiness. Is that what he did? Measured by happiness. He measured by love, I said. Everything else was just details. My father stood to leave, then paused at the bottom of the stairs. The $10. In the will. Was it really just a key to the bank box? I pulled out my wallet and extracted the original $10 bill. The one Grandpa had given me by the lake when I was 15. Worn soft with age, the writing barely visible along the edge. This was his first earned money, I said. He bought a book with it. The Count of Monte Cristo. A story about a man who finds treasure where others see only stones. He gave it to me to remind me that value isn't always visible on the surface. The 10 in the will was to lead me to the rest, yes. But it was also a reminder. Some treasures don't fit in bank accounts. My father studied the bill, then handed it back. Keep it safe. I will. He climbed the stairs slowly, like a man carrying weight. At the door, he turned back. I'm proud of you, he said. I don't say that enough. Maybe I've never said it. But I am. Not because of the money or what you're doing with it. Because you became the man I was too afraid to let myself be. Then he was gone, leaving me alone in the workshop where so many of my important moments had happened. I ran my hand over the table I was refinishing, feeling the grain of the wood, the promise of beauty waiting to be revealed. That night, Connor and Madison came for dinner. We'd made it a weekly tradition, gathering in the kitchen where Grandpa and I had shared so many meals. Madison was excited about a writing workshop she'd enrolled in. Connor talked about his student teaching, how alive he felt in the classroom. Dad came to see me, Connor said eventually. Told me to follow my passion. Nearly gave me a heart attack. Me too, Madison added. He actually asked about my writing. Like really asked. Not just waiting for me to finish so he could tell me to minor in business. I smiled, thinking about Grandpa Joe and his long game. Even in death, he was still teaching lessons, still showing us that there are different ways to value a life. A toast? I proposed, raising my coffee mug. To Grandpa Joe, who knew that the best inheritance isn't what you leave behind. It's what you leave inside the people who loved you. We clinked mugs, 3 grandchildren finally understanding the wealth we'd inherited. Not the millions hidden in basement walls or tucked in bank boxes. The real treasure. The knowledge that we were worthy of love just as we were, that success meant more than achievement, that happiness wasn't something you earned but something you chose. Outside, snow began to fall, dusting Elm Street in white. The house creaked and settled around us, solid and warm and home. Somewhere I was certain Grandpa Joe was smiling. Hey, Madison said suddenly. What do you think Dad meant in the will? About some treasures not being measured in dollars. Connor and I exchanged glances, then burst out laughing. What? Madison demanded. What's so funny? Tell her, Connor said. Tell her what you told me about the coins. So I did. I told her about the hidden room, the rare coins, the properties, the investments. I watched her eyes grow wide as the numbers sank in. But why hide it? She asked. Why not just tell people? Because, I said, channeling Grandpa Joe, the minute people know about the money, that's all they see. They stop seeing the man who saved it, the love behind it, the lessons it represents. They just see dollar signs. And Grandpa wanted us to see more than that. So what do we see? Madison asked. I thought about it, looking around the kitchen where so much life had been lived. We see a man who loved us enough to play a 30-year-long game, who let himself be dismissed as a failure so that one day we could define success for ourselves, who taught us that the best revenge against people who undervalue you isn't proving them wrong. It's proving that their values were too small to begin with. We sat in comfortable silence, 3 products of privilege who'd found something more valuable than money in a rundown house on Elm Street. We'd found ourselves. We'd found each other. We'd found a different way to measure the worth of a life. And that, more than any amount of money, was Grandpa Joe's true legacy. The doorbell rang, unexpected at this hour. I opened it to find Mr. Hartley, the lawyer, standing on the porch with snow in his hair and a briefcase in his hand. "I'm sorry to intrude," he said, "but there's one more thing. Your grandfather left instructions that this be delivered exactly 6 months after the will reading. Today's the day." He handed me an envelope, thick with documents. "What is it?" I asked. Mr. Hartley smiled. "I believe your grandfather called it the rest of the story. Good evening, Mr. Mitchell. Give my regards to your brother and sister." I closed the door and returned to the kitchen, where Connor and Madison waited with curious expressions. "What now?" Connor asked. I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter in Grandpa's handwriting, and behind it, a document that made my hands shake. "Read it out loud," Madison urged. So I did. "Dear Ethan, Connor, and Madison, yes, I knew you'd all be together by now. If you're reading this, it means you've found your way to each other, just as I'd hoped. It also means you've learned the most important lessons I had to teach. But there's one more thing you need to know. Ethan, you weren't the only one I was saving for. Every grandchild had an account started the day they were born. Connor, Madison, your fathers never knew, because I learned early that Richard would see only the money and miss the meaning. But you each have your own collection, your own investments, your own future waiting. The amounts aren't equal. Ethan's is larger because I had more time with him, could better gauge what he'd need and how he'd use it. But there's enough for each of you to choose your own path, to disappoint or delight your parents as you see fit, to measure your worth by your own standards. Connor, yours is in coins from the years you were forbidden to see me, each one chosen with the teacher I knew you'd become in mind. Approximately 4 million, enough to teach without worrying about salary, to touch lives without counting costs. Madison, yours is in first edition books, the stories you loved but were told were frivolous, now worth enough to let you write your own. Approximately 3 million, enough to travel, to learn, to find your voice without asking permission. The keys to your safe deposit boxes are with Mr. Hartley. But remember, the money is just a tool. The real inheritance is knowing you're loved, knowing you're enough, knowing you have family who sees your true worth. All my love, Grandpa Joe. P.S. Tell your father I said checkmate. The kitchen erupted. Madison was crying. Connor was laughing. I was doing both. We hugged. A tangle of limbs and tears and joy. 3 grandchildren who just discovered that Grandpa Joe's long game was even longer than we'd imagined. "He really saw us," Madison whispered. "Even when he wasn't allowed to know us, he saw who we'd become." "Checkmate," Connor repeated, shaking his head. He played chess while everyone else was playing checkers. We spent the rest of the night planning, dreaming, reimagining our futures with the freedom Grandpa's gift provided. Connor would start a school for kids who learned differently. Madison would really write without worrying about marketability. The foundation would expand, reaching more kids who needed what we'd found, not money, but belief in their own worth. As they prepared to leave, Madison asked, "Do we tell Dad?" Connor and I looked at each other, remembering our father's face when he'd learned about my inheritance. His struggle to reconcile the man he'd dismissed with the wealth he'd accumulated. "Eventually," I said, "when he's ready to see it as more than just money. When he can understand what Grandpa really left us." "And what's that?" Connor asked, though I think he already knew. "Freedom," I said. "Freedom to choose love over achievement. Freedom to measure success by happiness. Freedom to be ordinary and find that extraordinary. Freedom to know that we were always enough, just as we are." They left, and I stood on the porch watching their taillights disappear into the snowy night. The house on Elm Street stood solid behind me, no longer a symbol of failure but a testament to a different kind of success. I thought about Grandpa Joe, about the quiet years he'd spent building futures for grandchildren he barely knew, about the patience it took to be dismissed as worthless while sitting on millions, about the love that said, "I'll let you think I'm nothing so that one day you can discover you're everything." The $10 bill was still in my wallet. I pulled it out, looking at the serial number that had started this journey. JE82415, Joseph Ethan. August 24, 2015. The day I'd told him I wanted to be happy more than exceptional. He'd heard me. He'd believed me. He'd spent the last years of his life making sure I'd have the chance to prove it. Tomorrow there would be lawyers and banks and financial decisions. There would be family dynamics to navigate and a foundation to build. There would be all the complexities that come with sudden wealth and shifted perspectives. But tonight, there was just snow falling on Elm Street and the warmth of a house that had sheltered love for generations. There was the memory of an old man in a flannel shirt, teaching a lonely boy that his worth wasn't measured in achievements. There was the knowledge that sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't what you're given. It's what you're finally free to give away. I went back inside, closing the door on the cold. In the kitchen, Grandpa's crossword puzzle still waited, half-finished. I sat down and picked up his pencil, reading the clue he'd been working on. Treasure hidden in plain sight. The answer was 7 letters. I smiled and filled in the boxes. Grandpa. Then I made myself a cup of coffee, black like he'd taught me to drink it, and settled in to finish what he'd started. Seemed only right. After all, he'd spent his whole life finishing what he'd started with me, turning a boy who felt worthless into a man who knew better. And that, more than all the millions hidden in basement walls, was the real treasure. The one that had been there all along, waiting for someone to look past the surface and see its true worth. Just like Grandpa Joe had done with me. Thank you for listening to my story. If you're like me, someone who spent years trying to earn love that was never truly offered, you know these aren't just stories. They're mirrors of our deepest wounds and greatest triumphs. Subscribe if these stories resonate with your journey. Hit that notification bell. Think of it as our regular meetup, where we share truths that others might not understand. And please, leave a comment below. Tell me, have you ever felt like an outsider in your own family? What would you have done in my shoes? Your words matter to me, and they matter to everyone here who's walked this lonely path. Tomorrow, I'll be back with another story. Until then, remember, family isn't always blood, and sometimes the greatest gift is discovering who you truly are. Take care of yourself. You deserve it.